Welcome to There Is a Method to the Madness. My name is Rob Maxwell, and I'm an exercise physiologist and personal trainer. I am the owner of Maxwell's fitness programs, and I've been in business since 1994. The purpose of this podcast is to get to the real deal of what really works, and most importantly, why things work. Hence the name, There Is a Method to the Madness. Before I get to today's show, I want to thank Jonathan and Lynn Gilden of the Gilden Group at Realty Pros. They are committed to providing the highest level of customer service in home sales. Why don't you give them a shout and figure out what your home is worth? 386-451-2412. I was working with somebody this morning. It's Thursday, and I've been working with this person on Tuesdays and Thursday mornings for years. And they are a great client. And I know that sounds very judgmental. You think, well, aren't all the clients great? Sure. But you know what? I'm going to explain what I mean before I get into the topic. When I say they're a great client, like they're motivated, they have a goal, they pursue their goal, they show up unless there's an absolute emergency. And in this person's case, like even then, they're trying to go at a different time. They work hard. They are compliant, which means they follow instructions. They are adherent, which again means that they don't miss. They try really hard. They trust. Those are all qualities of a great client. So this is a great client. We often have like interesting conversations too. So this morning, he was supposed to do about 10 reps at 150 pounds on the machine incline press. So I'm being very specific with the numbers for a reason. And we had slightly changed the workout format for him a little bit from what he's accustomed to. So it was slightly different and maybe in a slight different order. But he's warmed up. He's ready to go. And his target was 10 reps at 150 pounds, naturally with good form because that's what we want. And I believe he did 3. I thought he might have done 4, but he thinks he did 3. And then basically just gave out. And he couldn't do another repetition. Now I was a little bit surprised, and I think he was surprised. And he's a go-getter, as I said, so he doesn't like to, quote, fail. Even though, that's not really failing. I mean, if you're giving your best in an exercise session, you're not failing. But he's a little bit extrinsically motivated, so I think he looked at it as a fail because Coach Rob said he should and could get 10 reps, and he did 3 or 4, depending on whose count was right. So he looked at me in a little bit of disarray, and he says, "Is that heavier than normal?" And I said, "No." And I said, in fact, you blankety blank, although does it really matter who it is, because this is nothing but a positive story anyway, but, who knows, I'll just say blankety blank, have done 245 pounds for 2 reps before, and you've commonly done this weight for this amount of reps before. And he goes, for some reason, I don't know, I saw 150 and I got a little freaked out and I thought maybe it was heavier. He said, no, it wasn't. So he looks at me in common form with him and he says, do you mind if I try again? I'm like, no, let's go. So he did 7 more repetitions with relative ease. I mean, the last rep was probably all he could do, but the point was he wasn't cheating to get it. It didn't look like it was undue fatigue or stress or anything. And keep in mind, he only did 3 or 4 the first time. And this conversation sounds like it was long, but it really wasn't. Maybe 10 or 15 seconds. And then he was able to get 7 more with ease, which is very counterintuitive if he really hit fatigue or failure, right? The difference was his brain. what he believed he can do and not do. And then we had a conversation about that because he's in that line of work. And he's like, every time this happens, I'm kind of shocked and surprised that the brain is that powerful. And I said, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And, I've said this before in this podcast that some of the people I talk to regularly that are into health and fitness, like they don't love when I talk about some of the psychological variables to exercise and training, but it is everything. Like it is huge. So since they are my friends, I say, well, you know what? Too bad, because the problem with exercise adherence and compliance and also being the best we can be is rarely because people don't know what they're supposed to do. And it is mostly because people are not doing for whatever reason they're supposed to do. So it's a psychological decision. So the brain is extremely powerful when it comes to all of this stuff. Along the same lines, there's a lot to affirmations, and I want to get into that as well. When you tell yourself, I'm strong, I'm able to do this, whatever, but positive affirmations, whatever they might be, and they don't always have to be about exercise or training or fitness or whatever, but just positive affirmations. Like, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to lift this weight, all right? That's kind of combining an affirmation and also kind of some cognitive therapy as far as like explaining to somebody why we should erase the doubt from their brain. But a lot of times people will often kind of poo-poo positive affirmations. Yet the research is really clear that one side of the brain doesn't know which side the brain is talking to. Or let me say that again. That sounded like a little Bushism. Sorry, everybody, if you get politically offended. But, that was a joke about 10 years ago, maybe 15. But anyway, that was said improperly. Let me restate that. One side of the brain is not sure that it's you that's actually talking to it. So it's going to come from somebody else or it's going to come from you. And the brain that receives it really can't tell the difference. And I know a lot of people don't believe that, but there is truth to it. Like, they know that. So affirmations matter. So in other words, if I tell you, hey, I think you're strong, or you tell yourself, hey, I think I'm strong, that receptive center doesn't know really the difference. So we do have to be very careful about how we speak to ourselves. But let's go back to that first component of psychology, which is belief, and making sure that we really, really challenge something that we might see as false. There was many studies done. There have been many studies done in strength and conditioning on the power of belief. One famous study had different control groups and different experimental groups. One group, this was done with the bench press, so a strength training study done to show that what you believe going into it matters and impacts your performance. So one group was normal, meaning they were bench pressing the same amount of weight that they were told they were bench pressing. So they were kind of like the control group. So in other words, if they were told, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but let's just say 200 pounds. If they were told it was 200 pounds on the bar, it was 200 pounds. There was another group that was told that the weight was actually lighter than it was, but it actually was, let's just say, 200 pounds. So there was a group that was lied to ethically, right? They knew going into it there was going to be some games, but they were told it was 200 pounds. In reality, it was maybe 20 pounds. And I don't remember the exact number of pounds down or pounds up that it was, but they were given a different number than it actually was. and it was actually the 200, but they told it was lighter. Let's say it was 180 pounds. And then finally, there was a group that they told was 200 pounds, but it was actually, say, 220 pounds. So it was heavier than what they were told. All right. Now, the interesting thing is, and then they were all rotated around. This study lasted a couple different weeks. And basically, they were all doing roughly the same weight. And then one group was doing slightly lighter. One group was doing slightly heavier. But they were lied to. All right. The interesting impact of this study found that those that were told they were lifting weights heavier than they were, even though they weren't, or I should say heavier than they're used to, even though they weren't, underperformed. Those that were told they were lifting lighter weights than they actually were, but they really were weights they were accustomed to or heavier, actually overperformed. Isn't that crazy? And the studies have been replicated in this over and over and over, which means basically confidence begets better performance, and better performance begets confidence. Like, it's a loop that goes hand and hand. Okay? So the bottom line is, if a person thinks something is heavier than they're able to do, they will underperform. Now, why? Well, there's a lot of theories. But basically it's just the quit theory. Like, they quit before they even start because they've told themselves they can't do it. So at the first little bit of resistance, they essentially stop trying. And then the people who overperform when the loads are actually heavier, but they're told they're lighter, it's basically the same concept. They believe they can do it. So when they start pushing a little bit harder, when they feel the resistance, they have this thinking of, you know what, I've done this before. Maybe I'm just a little tired. I shouldn't quit. And they push through it. And so I didn't have to do a double-blind study here at my gym this morning to prove this. I was able to do it with my client because it was the same concept. He just forgot how much weight he's using on the chest press. That's my job to pay attention to the weights a lot. Not everybody pays attention to it. So he might have been thinking it was a different exercise. That's very possible. But when he thought it was over his head, he naturally just kind of quit. Not because he's a quitter. Remember, I started out this whole podcast talking about what a gamer he is, what a hard worker he is. So it's a natural inclination to sort of quit when we think we can't do something. The brain is so powerful and important, and our way of thinking matters so much, and a positive attitude will definitely carry you a long way. Now I'm going to give you a similar story and show you sort of the inside of coaching. When I was working with more endurance athletes about 15, 20 years ago, it was a common gig for me. I worked with a lot of the different athletes using physiology to try to help them be their best. And I was working with someone who was a pretty darn elite endurance athlete back then. She was a phenomenal runner, cyclist, triathlete. She was really, really, really good. One of the better ones in the area. Probably the best in Volusia County for a while there. And she had, again, those traits I mentioned earlier of a great client athlete, like very adherent, very compliant, followed instructions, did whatever I asked, never quit. Just had all those qualities, which again, going in, I think really, really helps. And like a lot of people, just had a little bit of self-doubt. Not a lot, but, fairly confident person, but had a little bit of self-doubt when it comes to her endurance stuff, her triathlon stuff. And so, a good coach is going to help an athlete overcome that. And so that would be what I would do a lot because they're very compliant. They were going to absolutely do the work that I wanted them to do. And, I knew that going in. And so I would give challenging goals and workouts. And then I started giving challenging goals for races. And I can remember a few times thinking to myself, you know what? I don't know if they can achieve this certain time. I believe it was a couple running races I did this with, and which is a little more objective. Like you have a little bit more control over setting a goal, where triathlon's, so iffy because the swim could be short, it could be long, the bike could be different, all these things. So you can fine tune a goal a little easier with running. So I can remember thinking, I don't know if they can reach this. Like if they reach it, it's going to be a stretch. Like it could be close, but it was going to be a stretch. Like it wasn't impossible, but I knew it would be a stretch. But I didn't let that on. I just told them, you know what? I absolutely know you could run this time. Like, I know you can run this time. They're like, I don't know. I said, no, I know you can run this time. So they ran the race and they hit the time. And then I did it maybe a couple months later, or, within that. I just remember there being more than one instance where I did this. And then like maybe a year later or so, like after they were sort of starting to wind down some of their training, I let them in on my secret. I said, I wasn't 100% sure that you could do it either. Like, even if you were close and didn't make it, you reached your goal and it was awesome. But I was going to stretch you as far as I could. So I wasn't sure, and they kind of laughed. But I remember like around that time, they were saying, Rob knows what he's doing and he pushes me and he helps me get better. So if he tells me I can do this, then I can do it. And so I kind of built in them my confidence so they had confidence. So how we respond, how our performance goes really, really matters beforehand, how we are thinking about it. We're not always going to feel great. We're not always going to be our best physically, mentally, spiritually, whatever. But our attitude is really going to impact how we perform. And then how we perform is going to impact how we feel. Now, some people are more extrinsically motivated than others. And all the studies I've done in sports psychology, and I've done a lot because my first degree was in psychology, has shown me that you really can't make an extrinsically motivated person too intrinsically motivated. You can get them more intrinsically motivated, but you're not going to totally shift their character over. So we don't spend a lot of time trying to get somebody more intrinsic or trying to get somebody more extrinsic. So instead, we kind of work with what we have. But the more extrinsically motivated someone is, the worse they're going to feel if they don't perform well in their workouts. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because like they go into it maybe a little bit negative, and then being a little bit negative will impact their performance, and then they're going to feel bad about their performance. So it's, it's not great that the extrinsically motivated people are more impacted by their performance, and then the mood or the attitude is going to impact that more. Like it would be more ideal if it was the other way around, but it's not. Whereas an intrinsically motivated person isn't going to be as negatively impacted by their performance because they're going to say something more along the lines of, well, I didn't hit my numbers, but I know ultimately my body doesn't know the difference, and I felt like I worked hard and I gave it my all, and, yada, yada, yada. They're not going to be as impacted. Now, definitely the mindset can still affect their workouts too. So the bottom line is, whether we're intrinsic or extrinsic, whether we exercise all the time sometimes, or whether we're thinking about our sports, our mindset is absolutely going to matter. We don't need to lie to ourselves. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. The people that say things like, you got this, you got this. I mean, what does that really mean? Like, that's not going to work. But instead it would be like, well, you can do this because you've done this before. Or, you can lift this weight because you've done it before. So, don't get into the I can't do this mindset. You know that you can. Or phrases like, well, I know what, no matter what happens, I'm going to be able to handle this because I have enough fitness to do so. So if you take somebody who's a little bit overwhelmed by doing a endurance event that might be a little bit longer than they're used to, like maybe they've done a bunch of 5Ks and they've never done a 10K. Well, it would kind of be lying to themselves or lying to them if you're their coach to say, well, it's just double a 5K. You're going to be absolutely fine and you're going to do this when you don't know. You suspect that they're going to be fine, but you don't know for sure. But instead, if you said, well, I know your fitness level is great. And so I do know that if you start to feel a little bit overwhelmed, if you feel like you've not paced correctly and you're starting to burn out or whatever, I know that you can absolutely just slow down a little bit and finish it and get through it. Like that's positive thinking without lying to yourself. But going into things with a positive attitude is so important. And again, it's not that toxic positivity stuff, because that stuff like really gets on my nerves, the you got this, or, the 1,000,001 praises people are given because of, for whatever reason on social media or something. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like objectively getting the person or yourself in the right mind frame of what you're there to do. Like I have a lot of clients, I could be talking about clients all day long. I just try to use recent stories of some different clients where stuff like this comes up in different contexts. So I've already given you, the stories of the weight, trying to get the weight. And I've given you stories of the endurance athlete. Sometimes people with positive mindsets will come in and say, I've really been under the weather the last couple weeks. And I know they have, like they missed or they were sick, and they say, but you know what? I know I'm going to get through it. I know I'm going to feel better, and I'm just going to do what I can today. Like that is a really positive attitude. It's not like giving in to the sickness. It's not like, not showing up because you can't be your best. Like that's negative stuff when you get into that mindset. It's really, well, I know I'm going to be fine. And I also know I'm not going to feel my absolute best today. But I also know this is a step in the right direction of my recovery and getting back to the gym and getting going again. Like this has happened like this week with a person, and I saw them in the beginning of the week and that was their mindset. Saw them today and their mindset was even better because they're starting to feel better. I mean, that is a huge mindset to have. And then what I found is the people that always have like negative mindsets, they're always like defeating themselves before they start. There's a lot of I can't, or it's too hard, or, stuff like that. I mean, they almost always prove themselves right. Looking up on my board here, there's this quote that says, those that think they can and those that think they can't are both correct. And, whoever originally stated that, I'm not quite sure. But there is so much truth to it. I mean, you can create a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think especially to the negative end. Like, if you're telling yourself you can't do something and something's too hard, I mean, you might as well stop right there. I mean, you're just not going to be able to do it. And if you say to yourself, oh, I'm absolutely going to crush this thing, and I know for sure I'm going to do this thing I've never done before, well, that's also its own level of arrogance. And the reality is you go into it going, there's no reason why I can't do this. And I know that I'm fit enough. And I also know it's not going to break my heart if I fall a little short of that, and I'm going to give my best. Like, there's the happy medium with positive thinking. There's true positive thinking, realistic thinking, like I talked about in the bench press examples, like, well, you've done this before, so you can do it, and then there is the defeatist attitude, I'll finish with saying that, like, one of the words us trainers hate is can't. We say it's the 4-letter word that starts with the C, and people's minds usually go in an even nastier direction, but it's can't. I mean, that's a really bad word. I mean, oftentimes it's won't, not can't. But when you tell somebody, hey, do 5 pull-ups, and they look at you and say, I can't. Say, well, I know you can do a couple. And then you can take a break and do another one. That's 3. And then you could take another one and do 4. But when their first words are can't, I mean, they're defeated before they even start. And I mean, I don't know where that stuff begins. My guess is it would begin in childhood or whatever. But there comes a point if you want to be your best physically and probably in every other area of your life, you need to kind of get can't out of your vocabulary. I mean, we've said for years, well, it's won't. You can stop eating after, dinner, but you won't because it's, pleasurable to do so. So it starts with really watching what we say to ourselves. We spend all day with ourselves, and yet, we worry about what other people say to us, but we give little credit to what we say to ourselves. So I really want everybody to try to jump on the positive mindset, and I believe it's absolutely critical. So next time you want to say I can't, instead just say, no, there's no reason on earth that I can't do this and do my best. That is in my control. Thank you, everybody, for listening to today's show. I really appreciate it. I ask you if you will please hit automatic download wherever you are getting your podcasts, and please subscribe to this show. It will cost you absolutely nothing. And if you heard anything you like, I would really appreciate it if you would send it to somebody who you think needs it. You can text it to them, you could email it to them, you can share it to your social media. And now I want to take the time to thank our second great sponsor, ProCharge Liquid Nutrition. The stuff is great. My personal favorite is the lemon lime. Each packet has 2 servings, and each serving is 20 grams of protein. The great thing about it is you can open up the packet and squirt it right into your mouth. You don't have to mix any proteins. You don't have to shake anything up. It is that simple. You can take it with you when you travel, so you don't have to try to pack any bulky protein containers. You can put it in your carry-on, or you could put it in your suitcase. That makes it super convenient. It's really great stuff. So check them out on my website at fittothemax.net, or just check them out and Google them at ProCharge Liquid Nutrition. Thanks, everybody.